CGAP from 1995 to 1999 and has served on the executive committee for several years. Ira Lieberman, some of you may have already run across. He was the founding CEO of CGAP, helped create and launch CGAP, and since then has continued to be involved in microfinance in numerous capacities as a board member and advisor to numerous microfinance institutions, funds, and advisory institutions. I would also say Ira has the distinction of this being the second book that he's had published by Brookings in the last 2 years. The first was a book that coincidentally is called In Good Times Prepare for Crisis, which unfortunately makes Ira doubly useful on this panel as both an expert in microfinance and an expert in crisis management. So with no further ado, I'll just make a few brief remarks and then we'll get into some questions and answers with the panelists. And then, as I say, hopefully open it up to the rest of the attendees. So we've all seen the numbers about how COVID is likely to push hundreds of millions of people backwards in terms of their economic security and food security and poverty. And I was just looking the other day to sort of drill down into more specifics. I was looking at a survey of research that's been done in Nigeria over the last few months, 5 different surveys that tried to determine how microfinance clients had been affected by the crisis. And the situation, as you can imagine, is quite dire. Some of the specifics are dramatic increase in food insecurity, somewhere between 30 and 50% increase in the number of people facing food security. And just to put a point on that, what that means is that they're skipping meals. A second point that was found in the surveys is that people are drawing down their savings very substantially in order to try to maintain both a minimal standard of living and also in some cases to meet debt payments that are coming due. And finally, significant numbers of people don't have the resources to project forward a standard of living for even a month. So people are really facing a very dire situation. They're hopeful that things are going to turn around, but as we're seeing around the world, that may be a bit optimistic at this point. So what are we seeing in terms of the response? Well, one major DFI, I was looking at their public statements recently, and they indicated that their priority goal is to, quote, preserve the viability of our current portfolio. And as a fund manager, I can perfectly well understand that imperative to look to our companies and to do everything we can to stabilize them, to help them emerge from the crisis in good shape. But I think if we take off our investor hat and our fund manager hat for a minute and look at what the purpose of our support and engagement in the microfinance sector is. And really it's to provide some value and benefit to the microfinance clients that they can't get elsewhere, that other institutions do not provide to them. And so really in terms of preserving the viability of our current portfolio, the obvious way to think of that is preserving the financial value and making sure that our companies are competitive and can compete with fintechs or other institutions that are trying to steal their clients. But really, I think it's important for us, as I said, to step back and think about, well, is that really from a development standpoint and a poverty alleviation and economic security standpoint, is that really why we're in this business? Or really, are we trying to find those clients who are not served by competing institutions and those clients who may not be the most profitable to serve, or those clients who may not enable us to reach vast scale, but in fact are in particular need of the services that microfinance institutions traditionally have uniquely provided. Similarly, we hear a lot about digital financial services and how important it is for our institutions to move aggressively to incorporate digital financial services into their operations and product offerings. But again, I think it's important to step back and ask the question, well, why are we doing that? Are we doing that because we want to compete with other institutions that are poaching our clients? Or are we doing that because we actually are enabled by using digital financial services to serve those clients better and provide them with products and services that they can't get elsewhere on terms that are more valuable to them? So with those sort of brief framing remarks, which I hope are moderately provocative, I'm not trying to be too belligerent, but we'll now turn to our panelists and see get their perspective. So first, Ira, if you can just briefly tell us, how did this book come about, and what were the goals? What were your goals in with this book?
Well, I have to thank you, Paul, and it's my pleasure to be with you all today. And I have to tell you all that Paul was my partner in crime on this book throughout. And he has a house in Weston, Massachusetts, and I have a summer house there. And we often plot to make it the center of the microfinance world. And so we talked about this book early on. But it really came about 3 or 4 years ago when we held a workshop or a seminar at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. It's my undergraduate university, and I'm an advisor to an international program there. And I helped start the microfinance program there. And we had 20 or so people from all over the world to talk about the future of microfinance. We did it in panels, no set presentations, but we had 4 panels of 5 people each. And out of that came an extensive paper that Paul and I and Anna Kans were authors of, but had contributions from the various participants. And we put out a series of blogs on the findings of the conference and a series of videos. And about a year later, we decided to formalize that and make it the book. And the book has contributions from about 15 different authors. It has 16 chapters, and it covers both matters regionally, Latin America, Africa, Asia, etc., and Africa, if I didn't mention Africa. And it also covers key topics like financing, or the background, how microfinance grew and commercialized, the chapter I wrote, or it has chapters on emerging technology. So it's a rich compendium. That's my only plug for selling the book. And it's been 4 years in the making, but only came out this year, right before the crisis.
Thanks. Well, let me turn to Renee. And what would you say are the book sketches out some of the sort of key accomplishments and milestones along the sort of path that microfinance has traveled to reach its current very substantial scale and levels of outreach and sophistication. What would you say were some of the key factors that enabled microfinance to achieve its success to date, and what were some of the things that have held it back?
I think that the microfinance has really gained a great outreach, and from development projects at initial stage has become really very much part of the financial sector in many of those countries that we are working in, because we decided that it has to become sustainable and impactful. So I think the challenge of sustainability and of bringing impact at scale has helped this sector to become truly financial sector, part of the financial sector. And doing so, it has become commercialized, and I think this was a very important part of it. But to balance the commercialization of microfinance, we have also set all kinds of standards for social performance to measure and report on impact. And this has also helped us clarify the mission of microfinance. And this is still very valid, and even more so valid nowadays of the COVID crisis.
And let me ask you, Ira, just briefly the same question. What do you see as the key factors that have enabled microfinance to get to where it is now? And what do you think some of the maybe remaining challenges are that remain?
Well, I would agree largely with Renee. There was a large thrust of donor support initially. And when I was leading CGAP had its own fund to provide seed capital to emerging microfinance institutions around the world. And we were surrounded by 26 donor institutions and two foundations, Rockefeller Foundation and the Open Society Institute, the Soros Foundation. And those institutions were providing about $300 to $500 million a year to the industry in its early stages. So the industry was highly subsidized at that time. About 10 years in, so that was mid-1995, about 10 years in, with the emergence of microfinance investment funds, which were usually public-private partnerships in terms of the investor base, and the commercialization of microfinance, we began to see this emphasis on sustainability, which CGAP had adopted from day one, take root. And now you have a number of very large institutions, many over 100,000 clients, several with millions of clients, and some are multinational institutions. And so the base or the core of the industry in almost every country has a few leading institutions. To some extent, the industry has become highly concentrated. I think people talk about technology a great deal, but I would give credit to savings as one of the major steps, that people were able to find safe places to save once microfinance institutions were regulated. And savings not only helped the MFIs because it gave them a core base of capital from which to on-lend, but it really gave the clients a safe way to protect themselves against the worst aspects of poverty, or having to run to money lenders when they were in difficulty. I'm afraid today that one of the bigger problems will be that people are going to draw down their savings and not have a shelter or have a cushion against even worse times. And I think the recovery of the industry is going to be directly related to recovery from the virus. And even with the promise of vaccines, that could take some time now for these vaccines to extend into our client countries. So I am afraid this crisis will be with us throughout 2021 into 2022 and maybe beyond. We also know that crises have a history of a tail well beyond when they're officially declared over, meaning that growth has restored itself in the world. The worst aspects of poverty and crisis may be with us for some time. So for microfinance going forward, I think we're going to need to go back to basics in a large respect. Institutions are going to really have to look to support their clients, and there may be risk inherent in that, but we may have to be all more risk accepting, because I don't think it's going to be the same stable microfinance we've seen over the last 15 or 20 years.
So let me ask you, Renee, your companies work in some very challenging environments, rural areas, in sub-Saharan Africa. And I should note that 2 of the 3 nominees for this week's award, the European Microfinance Week Award, are in fact among your companies, and in particular with the focus on savings, as Ira was just mentioning. So looking at your companies that are facing particularly challenging operating environments and client populations, what do they need, and what do they need to do differently, or what particular kinds of support do they need to be able to continue to support those clients through the crisis and beyond?
Well, the microfinance institutions that are member of our network, and also in general, the microfinance institution that are focusing on rural clients, those clients that are serving smallholder farmers, women, and youth in the informal sector in sub-Saharan Africa, in those very remote and hard to reach countries, are going to be hit. Not, I would say, not so much in terms of health crisis, but very much on the economic crisis that is following the pandemic. And I've followed some of the sessions during this European Microfinance Week, and we have been talking about how agriculture has been affected by the crisis, and we know that prices has gone down, and there are a lot of logistics problems for bringing all those goods from the field to the cities to feed the cities, and we know there are a lot of losses and things like that. So the economic crisis is going to be huge, and therefore microfinance institutions are going to face, in the first place, a few problems in terms of defaults, and because their clients are not able in the short term to repay back. So they are going to face some liquidity problems. But even more than liquidity problems, they are also going, for some of them, to face some solvency problems. So I think that in the financial aspect of it, many of them will have to really find solutions to be able to survive the economic crisis of their country. And as Ira says, it's not only going to be on the 2020 situation, it's going to be more so on 2021, when all these microfinance institutions will discover how badly they are hit from the defaults of 2020. And more so, I would say that they will have also to adjust to maybe a different pattern of production and income of their clients, because there are more risk, and they will have to learn to live and survive with those risks, adjust to those risks. The economic model of these countries are going to change. They will have to adapt to those change. For example, instead of exporting agriculture, because, in Europe and in America, we are very much hit by the economic crisis. So we are going to buy less from developing countries. So instead of exporting, and the African countries will have to develop the regional market, the local market in terms of agriculture. And also because they won't be importing so many inputs from also northern countries, they will have to develop a more maybe environmentally friendly type of agriculture using agroecology. So just to give a few examples of how this crisis is going to affect, in fact, not only temporarily the situations of countries, but I think it will lead to some in-depth change, and as their clients will have to become resilient to the new situation, I think microfinance institution has to accompany their clients in this resilience and help them build their capacity, financial capacity, but also technical capacity to find new business models and survive and work through this crisis.
Well, thanks. You partly anticipated my last question, and I'm going to pose this to both Ira and Renee for any further brief remarks, and then open it up to any of the other attendees to add their remarks. I think we have a little more than 10 minutes left, and again, I'm sorry that we started a bit late, but. So Renee's touched a bit on what she sort of sees as being essential support for clients looking out beyond the crisis, or as the crisis evolves and mutates in 2021 and 2022. So if you could both just very briefly say what you would like to see done by who in order to ensure that the microfinance industry and institutions that emerge from the most severe phase of this crisis are able to support their clients in meeting that more challenging and very different environment that we expect to exist as the crisis begins to resolve. So very briefly, who needs to do what to make sure that microfinance can continue to contribute to the well-being and security of its clients going forward? Ira?
Yeah, so I think Renee gave a great answer, and particularly related to agriculture. One brief comment about that: a lot of our countries are facing not only the twin health and economic crisis, but they're facing environmental crises. There have been two massive hurricanes in Central America back to back. And I know the Sahel had drought going on for some time. I don't know if and locusts on top of that. I don't know if that's a prevailing issue still. But we're going to probably see the ongoing environmental impact on developing countries during this time. So we have a third leg to the crisis that may hit some countries differentially. But I think what has to happen is, I just read a CGAP report early this morning that the first phase of moratoria are expiring for clients. And a lot of the moratorium for institutions by funds were done on a handshake. We may need to see a rollover and extension of these moratoria to give people more breathing room on debt repayment. That's something the industry never did before, but this is a wholly new time. Also, I would like to see and watch carefully the drawdown on people's savings because their lifeline is, this will affect the institutions used to having the capital from savings, but the drawdown on savings will be a signal of how much difficulty people are in. Third, I think that, so we should be analyzing that. Third, I think we need emergency liquidity vehicles, which Paul and I wrote about early on in the crisis. I know Renee, I'll give her PAMIGA and a plug. I know PAMIGA is working with Alex Silva and Omtrix to put together an emergency liquidity fund for rural Africa, maybe beyond, Renee. And that's struggling to come together. I think donor institutions really need to step up and get it done. And I think they're going to have to do more such funds, either on a global or regional scale in other parts of the world. Certainly Central America is going to be one of them because of the crises, not only in microfinance and not only from the medical crisis and the economic crisis, but now the severe environmental crisis. which hit several of the countries very, very severely and will have lasting effects, just as it did on Haiti several years ago and as it did on Puerto Rico. So I think emergency liquidity funds can be a very critical issue. And I think the sooner the better, because you don't want to see institutions failing due to insolvency, which Renee pointed out.
So, so I'm going to turn to Renee, but just one point. If any of the attendees would like to chime in after Renee's remarks, I think we are going to be given a few more, a bit more time, so we don't have to be in quite such a rush. And so we'll go till about 10 past the hour. So if any of the other participants, attendees here would like to comment on this question or other issues that have been raised, I think you can raise your hand, and I believe I'm able to unmute you. So Renee, who should do what?
So I think that donors, philanthropy, foundations, and DFIs should join hands and support those emergency and recovery funds that Ira has been talking about. Yes, Pamiga Finance in consortium with Omtrix and Grameen Crédit Agricole, we are promoting a 50 million fund for sub-Saharan Africa, focusing on rural microfinance institutions, those institutions that are really focusing on the smallholder farmers, the women, and the youth in the most remote places. And we think we really need to be not forgetting those institutions that maybe not as large as those large banks that will be attended by governments or larger funds, but we need to be serving those clients. I think that donors should be also very attentive to provide technical assistance grants so that we can help microfinance institutions transform into digital delivery channels, because with the COVID, it will be very important to be able to deliver in a very smart way and in a very efficient way services in the most remote places in an efficient way, but also have microfinance institution able to deliver the digital financial services in the most responsible way that it can be, not just be competing, but also use it for to serve their clients the best way. And finally, I would say that for microfinance institution to be coming back to basics, it will need a lot of technical assistance to help governance of these microfinance institutions realize the kind of leadership that is needed to help their institution go back to being client-centric and serving the clients, providing them with the kind of products that will help them become sustainable and come out of the crisis. So I think there are a lot of roles for everyone to play, and we should be willing to play it in a very synergetic way.
So you've mentioned the need for what maybe we could call the non-commercial or non-exclusively commercial investor and donor community to step up. And you've also both mentioned, the priority need for liquidity facilities to support the microfinance institutions through this period. But you've also both mentioned solvency. And when we get to liquidity is very nice because you can sort of hope, you'll get your money back. Solvency is maybe a different issue. And there probably won't be enough money to go around to all the institutions that are decapitalized. So how would you advise that this community that you're asking to step up of the donors, DFIs, philanthropies, how can they choose where to direct their support in terms of solvency issues? And again, just encouraging participants to, I haven't seen any hands raised. I think I should see them if they're going up. So I'm continuing to look.
You know, Paul, when I was at the World Bank, in addition to CGAP, my other major occupation towards the end of my career was on emerging market crises throughout the world, starting in Mexico in 1994 and 95, and then the East Asian crisis, and then moving on to Turkey and then Argentina. So I participated in crisis resolution in all the major emerging market crises. And one of the things we did on the financial corporate side were systemic workouts. And I think this is directly applicable to what we might see with MFIs, that both donors and funds may need to participate in workouts. And one of the most critical things in a workout is new money, fresh money coming in. The other thing is debt
So
extension.
who gets it?
Sorry?
Who gets the money?
Well,
Who
in
gets
this case, it would be the MFIs, but that should allow them to keep their businesses going, so to speak, to be able to on-lend. So then you get into debt recapitalization and debt stretch out, and most important, equity injection besides new money. The hardest thing is to get new money in a workout and to get new equity. And funds may, rather than losing the money, you and I worked on the Nicaraguan crisis with Banex years ago. There was great reluctance by the investment funds to put in adequate new equity. So the investors did, but that got absorbed and lost very quickly. So you have to have extended workouts, not of a year or two rollover, but you're going to need medium-term workouts of 5 and 6 years to give this time, because even if we have vaccines, this is not going to penetrate into the developing world in the way it should into late 2021 or well into 2022. I read also today that the Chinese vaccine has just published that it's proving not terribly effective, and it's under big trials in Indonesia and Brazil, 2 places where it could do great help. There was a third, I can't remember the third country, but also a developing country. So even if the vaccines now being touted in Germany and the US were to reach their promise, given their difficulties of technical delivery, we're talking well into late 2021, 22 before it gives our client countries the benefits they should. And so we need to think of medium-term workout solutions. So I would say one of the things we could do is to mount a consistent workout program for institutions in difficulty. That doesn't mean you save everyone. There may be institutions that are just purely insolvent and they haven't been managed well, they haven't been governed well, or they're simply too far gone. There isn't enough resources to save everyone. So you're going to have to look at viable institutions that could be viable in the medium to long term, but are not going to be viable in the short term.
Yeah, some hard choices ahead. Well, thanks. We have two good questions from Stephanie for the panelists, and Stephanie appears to have read the book very closely and carefully. So two good questions. The first question is, how would we differentiate, because this comes up in the book, I think multiple times, how do we differentiate between financial access and financial inclusion, and how might that differentiation help us sort of focus our efforts going forward? That's our first question, and I'll let you, if either of you wants to comment on that, and then I'll
I'll pass that to Renee.
Yes, I think that for me, financial access is really a quantitative aspect of the question, is how many people, we can reach. And this is, I would say, more like a governmental or central bank kind of perspective, when they want to see, more and more people who have access to formal services, so that they can at least have a good oversight on the situation. So financial access is more a quantitative and more macroeconomic notion, and financial inclusion is much, much more qualitative, because then you really focus on those who have the most need. So the people who are the poorest, the most vulnerable people, those who have a lot of constraints that usually will exclude them from accessing to any kind of services. So financial inclusion means that you really use the financial services to bring the people into the economic ecosystem and not leave them out. So I think it's totally two different, they can be overlaps, but it's really two different notion in a whole.
Yep, very good. Thank you. So the second question, and you've mentioned this already, Renee, in terms of the importance of microfinance institutions, particularly those that are operating in more remote areas, rural areas, of incorporating digital tools to enable them to more efficiently and effectively reach clients and outreach. The question is, what can smaller MFIs take? What steps can they take to actually implement some of these digital tools, given that they have less to invest in these efforts? And I should say, there's been in recent weeks, quite a bit of discussion and maybe second thoughts about the challenges that the microfinance industry faces in terms of moving very aggressively towards incorporating a lot of digital tools into their products and offerings. And these challenges raise from cost, that this is not a trivial cost, and it's not a one-time cost, it's an ongoing cost, to security. We've all, I think, received multiple warnings about how our personal information, financial information, has been accessed by unauthorized people and microfinance institutions. These same security challenges. So how can smaller institutions, square this circle of needing to incorporate digital tools while facing some of these cost and complexity challenges?
Can I take a little shot and then pass on to Renee?
Yeah.
One of my concerns now is, given all the microfinance institutions are going to have to do to survive and go back to fundamentals to support their clients, it's expensive and time consuming for management and a board to take on digital finance and maybe also work with fintechs. And I think this is a worthy medium to long-term goal for them, a very important one, but maybe not now. I would say, if you're dealing with, client losses, you're dealing with debt rollovers, you're dealing with the need to refinance yourself, where are you going to have the resources unless we have donors step in and provide funding and technical assistance for that? So I'd be a little leery of launching a digital finance effort in the midst of this crisis. I may be going against the tide of the industry. I know CGAP has promoted digital finance very intensively, but I just think it may not be the time.
Well, for me, I think that microfinance institution won't be starting digital finance now because of the crisis. This trend or this need has started way before. It's not, we are not discovering digital in 2020. So I would say that those microfinance institutions who have started working on their digital transformation, and I agree with Paul that it's not just adding digital finance as a product, just like any kind of other products that we are adding. It's really a transformation. It involves a lot of technology, but also involves a lot of human resources that has to be totally changing, the procedures, the way how they are distributing, it's really a vast transformation. But many microfinance institutions, including rural microfinance institutions, have started that journey already. And I think that for those, it will be very, very important. And I agree, donors should step in, help them accelerate this transformation during the crisis, because it will help them really be able to transform, because it will take a lot of cost out of what they are usually doing, and it's going to really help the whole change of model for these institutions. So my recommendation is to help those who are already on the journey to accelerate this digital journey.
Very good, thanks. So there's another comment in the chat. I guess maybe people aren't actually able to raise hands. Just a comment from Sahana, and I'm not sure if you can all see this. Digital transformation involves building strong strategy as well. The importance of that is oftentimes undermined. Yeah, it is, as Renee mentioned, it really is, ultimate. I mean, there are some incremental steps that can be taken to try to improve processes and gain some efficiencies in various aspects of operations. But, as you move further along the digital path, it really does become a transformative experience in terms of human resources and cost structure and product delivery and whatnot. So
however, Paul, may I say just one thing,
sure.
Just to come back to the book and our conversation in Lehigh. Digital does not mean, the traditional trade-off of, high tech, low touch, and such. Huh? I think that we are all now in the sector more in favor of high tech and high touch approach. The high touch doesn't mean less social distancing, but meaning better client service and better client support to clients in the change of their business model consecutive to the crisis. And for example, I think green recovery is absolutely a very important aspect of this high touch that we can do with the high tech of digitalization.
Yeah, and I think something that we've seen that's been very interesting is some institutions, and this goes back, many years in some cases, have been quite successful and aggressive at what you might call digitizing the sort of back office. But the front office, the clients don't see any difference. The clients still see a very intimate relationship with personnel, and so there is that's obviously one model. But there are digitization can take many forms. So one last question as we wind up, from the standpoint of investors, and Renee's sort of touched on how many aspects of our economic relationships and environment are likely to look different in the years ahead than they have in terms of supply chains and in terms of trade patterns and in terms of what products are produced where, by whom. and this is going to have implications, obviously. Different industries are going to be impacted differently. We've already seen that in some countries, that some industries actually are doing better than they were in the pre-COVID world, while obviously many are very seriously negatively affected. How should investors be looking at microfinance in the years ahead? Should they, and of course, there's always the compared to what question, but should they be expecting a period of lower profitability and then a return to more pre-COVID levels of profitability and liquidity? Should they be looking at microfinance as perhaps not the most profitable segment of the financial sector, but one that provides so many sort of externalities in terms of benefits to the larger ecosystem that it's important to invest in, notwithstanding? I mean, how should investors look at microfinance over the next few years?
Go ahead, Renee.
Go ahead.
You know, in crises, traditional crises, you normally start with some kind of financial bust or stock market crisis or both as a signal that the crisis has arrived. This crisis hasn't experienced that, but I don't think the financial institutions are going to get away. A lot of the money, the subsidy money coming from Europe and the US are not, the renewal is not there yet. And I think a lot of financial institutions around the world are going to face difficulties, the formal financial institutions. As we mentioned, I think the microfinance institutions and their investors are going to face trouble, but that doesn't have to result in out and out losses if you end up in workout and rescheduling routines, and to the extent they're involved, regulators accept that. They give forbearance to the institutions. They don't force the investors to take write-offs at this point. They accept that it's a unique time of crisis. So coming out of this in, let's say, 2-3 years, there's going to be so much more demand for microfinance services because the World Bank and IMF have looked at 100 to 150 million more people going into poverty. And, you know, whether that's deep poverty or poverty, it's going to be poverty. And so the client base is going to end up being fairly robust over the next years for microfinance services. So if institutions themselves upgrade, they take on digital finance, they work with fintechs, they commercialize to the extent they haven't, and they attract investors, this would be a good opportunity for MFIs in a lot of developing countries, and in time for investors, but that's medium term, not short term. Short term, I think investors are going to have to look at moderate to negative profitability and play the long game.
Very good. Renee, any final comments on that question or any others?
Well, I just want to say two things. One is about the time now in terms of investors. I think this is really the right time for blended finance to come in. We have been talking the recent years about blended finance, and I think this is really the time for blended finance to come in. Blended finance where donors, well, let's say like European Union, and this is exactly what they are doing right now. So I think I should commend European Union are really now pushing a huge amount of money as first loss into funds, so as to enable other social investors or even more commercial investors to take higher risk. And also they use this blended finance to provide technical assistance grant to help the microfinance institution to build their capacity out of it. So really, I think for the short term, blended finance has all his place in this crisis. And I really think that this is where, well, European Union is doing it here, but I can imagine that there are other, regional instances that can play the same role. And I think that this is very important. This is also high time for public and private type of financing. We should not only concentrate on public financing. DFIs can do whatever they can do, but also philanthropy and also other foundations type of financing should come in and be willing to take a little bit more risk so that others can come in with their funding. And finally, I would say that in the future, it will be good that funders and investors have a more holistic look at the whole sector and maybe have a view of what we can call ecosystem finance and not only microfinance. And ecosystem finance means really taking the whole system as it is, with all the different players, with the different role they are playing. They all need financing so that they can each play their role, and therefore it's really a call for more collaboration, more co-construction, and more working together, because we will need it in the future.
Very good. Well, an excellent way to end. Hopefully, many of the participants in the European Microfinance Week will help to drive that collaborative spirit to address the whole ecosystem, as you so aptly put it. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining the webinar. Apologies again for the late start, but thanks to our European Microfinance Week hosts for giving us a bit of an extension so we could continue the conversation. So thanks again to everyone, and I hope you're all enjoying the week, and look forward to participating as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Many thanks. What a great job as host.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.